We draw your attention to the full disclaimer contained on SEDAR, EDGAR. We have scheduled a maximum of 1 hour for this call. We think it's important to stress our attention to clinical trial safety in the face of COVID-19. As the vaccines continue to roll out, we maintain increased safety measures at our trial sites. While there is no immediate impact directly to our ongoing clinical trials with subjects and some of our partners, we continue to monitor the dynamic situation of COVID-19. We have seen some minor complications to the logistics of our supply chain and manufacturing capabilities due to the increased travel restrictions and import regulations imposed during COVID-19 that many biotech companies are currently experiencing. Leading the call today will be MindMed CEO J.R. Ron. Please email any questions you may have to investors@mindmed.co. These will be addressed following the introduction. J.R., you may now begin the call.
Thanks, Colin. And good morning to everyone, and welcome to MindMed's Q1 2021 earnings call and management discussion. As we continue our mission to discover, develop, and deploy psychedelic-inspired medicines and therapies to alleviate suffering and promote mental health. I am J.R. Ron, co-founder and CEO of MindMed. I'm also joined today by our Executive President, Dr. Miri Halpern-Warnley, our Chief Development Officer, Rob Barrow, our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Dan Carlin, our Chief Technology Officer, Bradford Cross, and finally, our Chief Financial Officer, Dave Giebert. Only a little over a year ago, we were the first psychedelic medicine company to publicly list. The field has come a long way since then, and so have we. However, our principles have remained the same since we listed, and we will not waver from our mission to discover, develop, and deploy innovative therapeutics through federally compliant pathways to address large problems in society, including the opioid crisis and mental illness based on psychedelic substances. During the first quarter of 2021, we remained focused on our objective of building a comprehensive tool set for patients and therapists based on psychedelic substances. As always, we are committed to our strategy of execution through rigorous science and clinical trials. With this approach, we seek to transform once stigmatized compounds into medicines approved for marketing by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and equivalent foreign regulatory authorities. We plan to further this mission initially through classic psychedelics such as LSD or MDMA, and eventually through novel chemical entities based on psychedelics. We are currently advancing a diverse clinical pipeline of classics and novels, and will be targeting potentially accelerated development pathways. At present, we see two engines driving MindMed forward: our clinical development arm and also our digital medicine and technology arm, Albert. In order to one day launch and scale psychedelic therapeutics, we are convinced that MindMed and the entire psychedelic medicine industry will need to build technology platforms that help launch and deliver psychedelic-based therapeutics and make them accessible to all communities and patients in need. In April, the US federal government renewed their declaration that there are two declared public health emergencies: the opioid crisis and COVID-19. This is the same declaration that the federal government sometimes assigns to natural disasters such as Hurricane Katrina and others that have ravaged the United States. The cleanup for Katrina took many years. So too will the cleanup of our mental health in the aftermath of these public health disasters. According to the latest estimates from the CDC, more than 90,000 Americans died during the 12-month period ending in September 2020. And deaths linked to fentanyl overdoses rose 55%. COVID-19 has the possibility to have a long-term effect on the state of global mental health and addiction. Recent CDC figures are also not encouraging. For instance, studies revealed that 40% of adults in the US were already reporting struggling with mental health or substance abuse. Accessibility must be core to our mission, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's a logical business strategy when 40% of the country is suffering from the very mental illnesses for which we as a company are seeking to deliver solutions for. Our objective as a company is not to create fancy clinics on Park Avenue, but instead to provide therapeutic solutions and be a robust platform for all communities to empower doctors and therapists with tools to do what they do best, deliver the care. Our mission has become important more now than ever. Our team, empowered by your investment and shareholder support, is working hard to address these large societal and global problems. One day, we hope to enable accessible mental health solutions that heal those in need based on psychedelic therapeutics. We are honored to add a new board member to our board of directors, Dr. Sarah Vincent. Dr. Vincent is a triple board certified physician who specializes in adult, child, and adolescent and forensic psychiatry. She is the founder of the L'Oreal Psych Group, a group mental health care practice. Dr. Vincent is also an associate clinical professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at Morehouse School of Medicine, where she is the program director of the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship and adjunct faculty at Emory University School of Medicine. I'm extremely excited to work closely with Dr. Sarah and seek advice from her as we go about designing platforms that can one day enable accessibility of mental health solutions and innovative therapeutics. Her experience and perspective will be very important to this process and to our board of directors. We are also excited to continue attracting additional top-tier talent on the drug development side of our business by appointing Peter Mack as Vice President of Pharmaceutical Development. Peter joins MindMed from AstraZeneca, where he was the Director of Manufacturing for Inhalation Product Development. Peter holds a dual PhD in medical engineering, medical physics from Harvard Medical School and MIT, where he was a NIH biomechanics training grant recipient. Q1 2021 really marked the beginning of a MindMed 2.0 in both team building and overall strategy. Our internal thinking has grown from just being a drug development company focused on psychedelics to a company that believes in the future of psychedelic medicine through both drug development and technology. The Albert Technology Division and the software we are building there, I believe, will become as important as our clinical trials in delivering on our core mission addressing mental illness and addiction. Our Q1 acquisition of Health Mode was a declaration that technology will be central to how we discover, develop, and one day deploy psychedelic medicines. And more importantly, we gained two very strong executive team members in Dr. Dan Carlin as our Chief Medical Officer and Bradford Cross as our Chief Technology Officer. So there's a bit of a drum roll for the next slide. NASDAQ. Yes, we did it. I will say that again for all those that doubted our ability to get this done, but we are now listed on the NASDAQ and very proud to be. The journey was long, but we made history by being the first company in the world to list LSD on the NASDAQ. We appreciate the support and patience of all of our shareholders to get here. In Q1, we also managed to raise 92 million Canadian dollars in a financing and an additional 19.5 million Canadian in a private placement. This brings total capital raise to approximately 204 million US dollars, including warrants, and making us one of the best capitalized companies in the psychedelic medicine space. As I told our team on the day of the listing, now it's time to get back to work and use NASDAQ as a launch pad for the next chapter of MindMed 2.0. The future certainly looks bright for psychedelic medicine. I'm going to talk about one last thing, which is this morning's news. We received the FDA's Type C meeting responses. These gave us confidence to select generalized anxiety disorder as our initial indication for LSD in a phase 2b trial. Our team is planning to file the IND in Q3, and we intend to begin and ramp up this 200-person clinical trial in Q4, mainly at US clinical sites. Onwards, we march with Project Lucy. Rob Barrow, our Chief Development Officer, and Dr. Dan Carlin, our Chief Medical Officer, will go into greater detail later about the FDA's response and the overall strategy for Project Lucy. Today, I am really excited for you to hear from the rest of the executive team about our advancements in Q1 2020 and to give you an update on the ongoing clinical trials, MindMed's clinical strategies, and our overall operation. It's been a busy Q1 for us. But I'm extremely proud of both the executive team we have assembled in Q1 and the experienced drug development and tech team members we are now attracting as a NASDAQ listed company. We are building one of the leading teams in our industry, and human capital is just so important in this space. I will now hand it over to Rob Barrow.
Thanks, JR. I'd first like to take the opportunity to outline the core principles underlying our development approach for MindMed, particularly in relation to the broader psychedelic industry. First, we believe to successfully bring this class of drugs to market, we will require expert execution, relying on top seasoned talent from the pharmaceutical industry. As JR already mentioned, just this week, we announced the appointment of Peter Mack as our VP of Pharmaceutical Development, who joins us from AstraZeneca. Over the coming weeks and months, we will continue to add top talent that have proven track records leading novel CNS development programs. Second, we believe that a focus on scientific rigor is essential in the process to bring psychedelics to market. The exuberance around the potential of psychedelic medicines to catalyze the desperately needed mental health revolution has led to a spectrum of market entrants with a range of convictions and approaches. We will continue to pursue rigorous scientific assessment of psychedelic molecules to advance our drug candidates through proven development pathways as a leading CNS pharmaceutical company working in this space. Third, our research and development plans will utilize proven strategic and tactical approaches seeking to accelerate development timelines, ensure broad patient access to our therapies, and protect our market share upon commercialization. We are aggressively advancing our lead candidates and building a robust, diverse, and integrated pipeline that will drive near and long-term value creation. Fourth, our approach to the development process is also oriented toward clear paths to commercialization and targets building a package of evidence and partnerships that will enable broad adoption of our therapies. And finally, there's been an ongoing public debate about the ethics and appropriateness of intellectual property in relation to psychedelic therapies. Our approach is to aggressively pursue IP on true innovations that will provide us with strong IP claims and market protection. We do this while not giving in to the temptation to make frivolous patent claims for the sake of publicity or usurping public intellectual property from the public domain. Moving on to an overview of our development pipeline, over the first quarter of 2021, we have continued to make considerable progress to advance our lead drug candidates and to expand our drug pipeline through the launch of additional clinical programs and growth of our early stage development pipeline. Our development programs are aligned around 4 development franchises. Psychiatry, under which we are developing LSD for the treatment of anxiety and adult ADHD. Addiction medicine, under which we are developing 810MC for the treatment of opioid use disorder. Pain, under which we are developing LSD for the treatment of pain syndromes. And neurology, under which we are exploring LSD in to-be-disclosed neurological conditions. We remain on track across our development pipeline to advance both of our lead assets in the clinic. Additional details will be forthcoming regarding our early stage development programs, including the launches of new chemical entity development projects targeting a range of disease indications across these 4 key development franchises. Moving on to Project Lucy. Project Lucy remains one of our lead commercial development programs for the treatment of anxiety disorders with LSD. As previously disclosed, in December 2020, we had a productive meeting with FDA to discuss the development program for LSD and came away from the meeting with additional clarity on our clinical development approach and ultimate path to possible approval. As an extension of this positive pre-IND meeting, we sought further agreement from FDA on our clinical approach for the development of LSD in anxiety disorders through a Type C written correspondence. In line with these positive discussions, we will pursue the treatment of generalized anxiety disorder as a first clinical indication for LSD and anxiety. The clinical development program is scheduled to advance in late 2021 with the launch of study MMED 008, which is a phase 2B dose optimization study of LSD in patients diagnosed with GAD. The study will enroll approximately 200 adults with GAD across 5 treatment arms, including the placebo, and will assess improvements in anxiety symptoms following a single administration of LSD or placebo. The study will be a catalyst to select a final dose to be taken forward into phase 3 pivotal clinical trials. Additionally, based on the rigorous dose optimization design of the study, we believe it will significantly advance our scientific understanding of the underlying mechanisms of action by which LSD may have its clinical benefit. Generalized anxiety disorder is a chronic, often debilitating mental health disorder that affects approximately 6% of US adults in their lifetimes. Symptoms of GAD include excess anxiety and worry that persists for over 6 months, which can lead to significant impairments in social, occupational, and other functioning, according to NIMH. While there is substantial diagnostic overlap between GAD, MDD, and other mental health disorders, there has been very little innovation focused on the treatment of GAD in the past several decades. Dr. Dan Carlin will now give us a few thoughts on generalized anxiety disorder as both a market opportunity and why we chose to advance GAD as the first indication for Project Lucy. Dan?
Thanks so much, Rob. Yeah, thanks, Rob. It's important here to say a few words about why we think generalized anxiety disorder and anxiety in general are such important and meaningful targets for treatment. Anxiety is a universal feature of the human experience. At times, we all anticipate potentially uncomfortable and unfortunate future events. Aversive anticipation is a central and distressing feature of daily life for many. Worse still is the lurking awareness of our own mortality and the existential dread that this knowledge can carry with it. Though depression syndromes, in particular major depressive disorders, have been a major focus of drug development activity in recent decades, we see anxiety as both core to the suffering of many diagnosed with depression and a symptom that cuts across a number of other psychiatric disorders. At present, most anxiolytics, or drugs that address anxiety, are oriented towards suppression of the conscious experience of anxiety. Those existing medications are taken in anticipation of one's future anxiety as a reaction to a contemporaneous sense of heightened anxiety, and in anxiety's most acute manifestation, to avert panic attacks. In studying the treatment of generalized anxiety disorder through Project Lucy, we hope to help patients address the underlying sources of their anxieties to produce meaningful, sustained improvement across all aspects of their lives. If we are able to demonstrate that we can significantly improve the lives of people with anxiety disorders, it will open up a new paradigm for the treatment of anxiety and related syndromes. I'll hand it back to Rob to continue his discussion of our development pipeline.
Thanks, Dan. On to Project Layla on 18MC, we have also continued to make progress in advancing our addiction medicine program. Our lead candidate in this addiction medicine franchise, 18MC, is a synthetic analog of the natural psychedelic substance ibogaine. Extensive testing in animal models of substance use disorders suggests efficacy similar to ibogaine. Additionally, preclinical data on 18MC suggests a mitigation of the key safety risks associated with ibogaine administration. Most notably, 18MC does not appear to have proarrhythmic or neurotoxic effects, which support its selection as a lead drug candidate and potentially safer alternative to ibogaine or noribogaine. MindMed is developing 18MC as a treatment for substance use disorders and withdrawal with a novel mechanism of action. Unlike available therapies which center around therapies that selectively activate and/or block the mu-opioid receptor, 18MC acts by addressing the dysregulation of dopamine in the reward and pleasure centers of the midbrain, which are a hallmark of substance use disorders and central to many addictive behaviors. We intend to aggressively pursue this clinical program and progress it to a multi-center phase 2 study in the US under our open IND for 18MC in the treatment of opioid withdrawal as a key indicator of clinical activity in late 2021 or early 2022, subject to the completion of the ongoing phase 1 single and multiple ascending dose clinical trial. I'll hand it back to Dan to elaborate a bit on our thoughts on the needs in the addiction treatment space as well.
Thanks again, Rob. As JR pointed out earlier, the opioid overdose crisis in the US has done incalculable harm across wide swaths of our population. Despite the hard work of so many in the addiction treatment community, the epidemic carries on. Opioid use disorder is also one use disorder where there are some pharmacological tools that offer life-saving benefits in many cases, but there are too few tools, and the incidence of relapse and fatal overdose with discontinuation remains extremely high. Through our efforts, we aim to bring new and complementary medications to further enable prolonged remission and recovery from opioid use disorder. In the horror of the opioid death epidemic, we also sometimes lose sight of the other substance use disorders that are so harmful to our friends, neighbors, and colleagues. For example, more than 85,000 deaths a year in the United States are directly attributed to alcohol use. The annual economic cost of alcohol use is estimated to be over $250 billion, and approximately 1 in 10 deaths among working age adults results from excessive drinking. Despite this enormous burden, pharmacological treatments work for far too few and far less well than we would hope. There are also entire classes of substances of abuse, like psychostimulants, where there is enormous individual and societal costs, and there are no currently approved pharmacological treatments. I'm going to talk a bit about pain, and it's obviously related in many ways to substance abuse. I'll be discussing the recently announced launch of our new pain treatment franchise, which we've named Project Angie. In this new project, we are currently exploring 2 primary clinical indications for the treatment of pain. To start Project Angie, we will initiate a study of LSD in a severe pain indication. We are currently preparing a pre-IND briefing package for this phase 2A proof of concept study, which we plan to submit to the FDA in the second half of 2021. In addition, we are also evaluating a second indication in a common and often debilitating chronic pain syndrome. I'll talk a bit about why pain is so important. Patients experiencing chronic pain represent a large and growing segment of the population. And according to IQVIA's prescribing data set, the global market for analgesics is expected to grow over $31 billion by 2030. At the same time, and this relates to the previous franchise, overuse and misuse of opioids in the treatment of pain have contributed to the opioid epidemic in the United States and around the world. There's been little innovation in the pain market in decades, and the treatment paradigm is still dominated by opioids and the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, otherwise known as NSAIDs. It's important to share here that we don't see our expansion into pain as being a departure from our existing focus on mental health. Rather, we see tremendous alignment between our various franchises. Practicing clinicians in the fields of addiction medicine, psychiatry, and pain medicine have long acknowledged the dramatic overlap between these conditions. Many substance use disorders begin with the appropriate use of existing treatments for physical pain, while chronic pain is a substantial risk factor for the development of a subsequent mood disorder. Pain is most accurately conceived of as being a product of both the somatic or body-based sources of painful stimuli and the brain-based processing of these stimuli. Mechanistically, we are particularly hopeful about the potential effectiveness of LSD and future psychedelic-inspired medicines for the treatment of pain, because emerging evidence suggests that these drugs may target both of these loci for the suffering caused by pain. They'll target the brain via the same mechanisms that we believe they will use to treat mood disorders, improving the experience of the chronic pain sufferer. In the body, on the other hand, evidence suggests that LSD may work directly via enhancing the actions of our endogenous or our inbuilt descending pain suppression pathways. This is especially interesting since dysfunction of the descending pain pathways has been implicated as a potential cause of some forms of chronic pain. MindMed sees vast blue sky opportunity for this franchise, with evidence dating back to the 1950s that suggests LSD and other psychedelics may have analgesic effects. This treatment area remains largely untapped by companies studying psychedelics, with the majority of research focusing solely on psychiatric indications. I'll now pass the call to Miri, who will discuss additional portfolio programs and collaborations.
Thanks, Dan, and good afternoon from Europe. I represent geographically Europe into this call, and I welcome Europe as the leading in a number of projects. So Project Flow is our phase 2A study evaluating repeated low dose of LSD for treating adult ADHD. We have successfully reached an agreement on the study protocol with both the Swiss and the Dutch health authorities for both sites where we will run the study. To our knowledge, this is the first green light of a protocol from a regulatory agency to proceed with a commercial clinical trial testing the efficacy of repeated low doses of LSD. MindMed is diligently working to prepare now the GMP medication for the study and reply to questions from 2 ethics committees, and our site coordinators are focusing on subject recruitment strategies to optimize the execution of the study. We anticipate dosing to begin in the subject in Q3 at both our sites in Switzerland and the Netherlands. I will give you now an update on our R&D progress in collaboration with the University Hospital Basel. We are excited to continue our relationship with the Liechti Lab at the University Hospital Basel. UHB has achieved a leading position in the academic and scientific realm with LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, and other psychedelic research. Our strategy remains the same: to translate the clinical and research work done by the University Hospital and its leadership position into commercial drug trials conducted in compliance with FDA requirements and the requirements of other regulatory agencies. As part of the extensive licensing agreement with the University Hospital Basel, we have acquired 16 completed studies, mainly with LSD and MDMA, and the teams are working at evaluating the work done over these many years in Switzerland with the aim of translating study data into commercial program. Maybe the first example of this strategy is Project Lucy. You heard before, the high-dose LSD for anxiety indications, where the data from past and ongoing work in UHB in anxiety is being integrated into our FDA program. In the frame of this collaboration with UHB, we have 4 ongoing phase 1 studies, 3 ongoing phase 2 studies, and 4 phase 1 studies, which are just about to start. The research molecules are LSD, MDMA, psilocybin, mescaline, and DMT. Now, a few words on the development of novel psychedelic compounds. We are working on a new line of psychedelic compounds, which we believe have the potential to be enhanced versions of what is called the classic compounds, and will demonstrate variations in onset and duration of action, in receptor selectivity, potency, and safety. The drug candidates are identified internally and also with leading external partners. An example of the partnership is the collaboration we have in Switzerland with the company Mindshift Compounds AG. This collaboration focuses on developing and patenting next-gen psychedelic compounds with psychedelics and/or empathogenic properties. A library of initial compounds has already been synthesized by Mindshift, and related applications were filed by MindMed. We plan to begin the first in-human phase 1 clinical trial with the first new molecule as early as Q1 next year through this existing clinical trial platform for psychedelic and pathogenic compounds in Switzerland. And we will use, of course, this platform to build further our IP. Now, a few words on the publication of new data on personalized MDMA dosing. A recent published study in the Journal of Psychopharmacology provides the first scientific data for predicting responses to MDMA and optimizing dosing. The study was based on 10 randomized placebo-controlled trials, totaling 194 MDMA administrations. It's really the first scientific data on personalized MDMA treatment, which includes pharmacogenetics, personality assessments, and all psychometrics all in one analysis. This approach allows us to step away from the rigid and inflexible drug-centric approach of one size fits all, and start leveraging data and machine learning to help health professionals and patients engage new personalized therapies in the treatment paradigms. We are building unique biomarker profiles of individuals across genetics, phenotypes, personality traits, and cognitive states that will allow us to best predict which therapy framework configuration will be most effective. Additional work will focus on applying the concept of personalized medicine, AI, and cross-disciplinary cutting-edge research to better understand and predict how individual biological phenotypes, genetics, and mental states correlate and interact with the responses to new psychedelic intervention paradigms. We hope that this will enable us to build and offer better decision support system for healthcare professionals and their patients, delivering the best set of evidence and scientifically derived therapy framework options for mental health treatment. Now back to you, Dan.
Thanks so much, Miri. And this is really related to Miri's comments directly. I'll be discussing the integration of health mode and subsequent activities related to digital medicine from a clinical perspective before passing it to Bradford to discuss some of the more technical aspects. The MindMed team has welcomed health mode to the family with open arms. The acquisition has helped MindMed move toward building a full stack digital mental health platform for psychedelic medicine. As a reminder, our mission is to make MindMed as much a digital medicine company as a drug development company. We believe the future of modern mental health care and psychedelic medicine will rely on improving infrequent self-reported and observed measures for mental health to a paradigm where the continual digital measurement of mind and body is as vital as the treatments themselves. This path starts with patient-facing measurement apps, allowing us to engage folks with relevant illnesses and collect a broad and deep set of data about individual symptoms, experience, trends, and underlying biology across a large cohort. These collected data, combined with real-world evidence, become the substrate for building AI models that are able to characterize, predict, and ultimately inform personalized treatment. This progression in measurement will also enable moving beyond broad diagnostic categories that did not meaningfully correspond to underlying biological and physiological realities and toward deep phenotyping. In psychiatry, where diagnosis is fundamentally based on the signs and symptoms of illness, the way a person appears and the way that they report their internal state, deep digital phenotyping will move us toward the convergence of the phenomenology of illness and the underlying genotypes and all of the other various advances in omics that are currently occurring. The ability to collect real-world, real-time outcomes data can have enormous implications for treatment planning, administration, and ultimately reimbursement in the future. It's a pleasure now to be able to pass the call to my Health Mode co-founder and the new Chief Technology Officer at MindMed, Bradford Cross.
Thanks, Dan. We've narrowed in on two major areas for applying a platform strategy to helping launch and eventually scale MindMed's clinical pipeline and digital therapeutics. First, consumer applications for patients and SaaS applications for providers. And second, core machine learning IP. Both these areas are supported by the Health Mode acquisition. First, we're extending and updating the flexible health tech application stack from our apps at Health Mode. That's iOS and JavaScript clients, web backends in Django and Node.js, machine learning services in Python, and infrastructure in Terraform and Kubernetes. This makes it very fast for us to spin up compliant, secure applications within which we can enroll patients into studies through an informed consent flow. Second, we're repurposing previous machine learning IP from Health Mode to indication-specific IP relevant to MindMed. Many folks have wondered how some of the Health Mode prior applications and technology would be relevant at MindMed. The answer is first, the fully reusable application stack mentioned above, and second, generalized machine learning approaches for specific data domains. In particular, our state-of-the-art modeling of audio pioneered through our work in respiratory, and the two big data domains that we've initially focused on that we're repurposing are the health mode audio I just mentioned, and behavioral data, which we worked on through neurodegenerative disease. Both these areas are targets for new innovation as well, packed into 2021 ship dates from MindMed. With JR and others in the executive team, we've been honing in on indication-specific full-stack markets. By that, I mean, we look at how market flows into community and applications and core IP and services and infrastructure. Examples of this include anxiety, addiction, PTSD, ADHD, pain, and soon others. For each market, we evaluate the online community and market opportunity for breakout apps with differentiated go-to-market and value propositions. Then we dig into relevant application features and core IP. Our intent is to own consumer-facing indication-specific applications that provide a new distribution platform for both pharma and for digital therapeutics. These can be used to embed IRB studies for our digital medicine research. We plan to ingest all relevant data domains, extending from our ability to work in audio and behavioral into NLP for text, becoming more advanced with audio via speech to text, and a great deal of other data accessible from mobile phones and watches, as well as vitals, genomics, and other relevant biological data through integrations with other partners. Meanwhile, on the provider side, we're working to build applications supporting both the unique elements of applied psychedelic-assisted therapy, as well as providing a configurable, personalizable tool set for therapists to compose comprehensive treatment plans for their patients, which include but also go well beyond the intricacies involved in psychedelic-assisted therapy sessions. We're keen to share more precise details about the applications and IP in the pipeline and look forward to doing so as we approach these launch dates. We look forward to bringing you further announcements around the strategic advancements and implementation of the Albert strategy in the coming weeks and months ahead. And back to you, JR.
I would now like to transfer the call over to Dave Giebert, who's going to run us through our Q1 financials and is our CFO. Dave?
Thanks, JR. Our financial statements for the quarter ended March 31st were released on Friday. They were reviewed by our auditors, RSM Canada LLP, and have been approved by the audit committee and our board of directors. The complete financial statements, along with related management discussion and analysis, can be found in the System for Electronic Document Analysis and Retrieval, the electronic filing system for disclosure documents of issuers across Canada at www.sedar.com, and now also on EDGAR at sec.gov/EDGAR. I'll provide a brief summary of our quarter-end financial statements. As a reminder, all figures are expressed in US dollars. MindMed continues to build its operating capabilities and to expand its clinical and research and development activities. The highlight of the quarter included the acquisition of the health mode to add to our digital technology capabilities and the completion of 2 rounds of financing. Our net and comprehensive loss for the 3 months ended March 31st was $14.7 million. And it's made up primarily of research and development costs of $5.8 million, general and administrative expenses of $6.1 million, and non-cash items, including share-based compensation of $1.8 million and amortization of intangible assets of $1.2 million. Research and development expenses for the quarter were comprised of payroll and consulting fees, $1.3 million, cost to acquire data and studies of $700,000, clinical research and regulatory costs of $1.8 million, manufacturing related costs of $1.1 million, license fees of $400,000, and other R&D costs of $481,000. Research and development expenses include all direct and indirect costs for the programs, compensation, licensing fees for intellectual property, as well as manufacturing, clinical, and regulatory costs. General and administrative expenses for the quarter consisted of payroll and consulting fees of $2.8 million, marketing and investor relations of $800,000, professional fees of $1.3 million, insurance of $650,000, and $584,000 of other G&A. Turning to the balance sheet, our cash balance at the end of the quarter was $159.9 million, and our working capital was $155.8 million as of March 31st. The net proceeds from financing activities during the 3 months ended March 31st was $90 million, and cash used in operating activities was $9.6 million for the period. With that, I'll turn the presentation back to JR.
Thanks, Dave. I'm going to go to some Q&A now with relevant discussions. Actually, Dave, while I have you, if we could just, this one is from Tanya at Canaccord, one of our analysts that covers us. What exactly are data and study acquisition costs of $2.8 million, and why did they flow through the P&L? If you can just address that, maybe, Dave, in the context of how GAAP treats this, or sorry, IFRS treats this.
Well, first of all, the data and acquisition costs in the quarterly statements are $658,000, so I'm not sure on that number. But the data and acquisition costs are costs firstly related to acquisition of some studies through University Hospital in Basel, and that totaled 500,000 Swiss francs, which is about 550,000. And then the remaining amount related to a collaboration agreement we have with New York University for funding some programs that they have there. The answer on the accounting side is that at our stage in the company, we don't meet any criteria for capitalization of any of these data acquisition costs, and as a result, they flow through the P&L.
Thanks, Dave. Another question from Tanya at Canaccord. I think this is best for Dan. Could you provide any additional color on Project Angie in terms of the market size, targeted clinical timelines, and the program's R&D budget? Dan, if you want to take this.
Yeah, sure. I think the most important point, and something that we considered deeply as we went into pain, is that pain is just very, very expensive on a societal level. There was a National Academy of Science report commenting on these data from 2010, which is now obviously a bit dated, but it's gotten worse since. And at that point, there were more than 100 million Americans who had chronic unrelieved pain. The cost was estimated to be $560 billion to $635 billion per year, composed to a large extent of direct healthcare costs, something in the range of $300 billion. But there are also all of these other sort of accruing costs: days of work missed, which accounted for 11 to 12 billion; hours of work missed, which accounted for 95 to 96 billion; lower wages because of inability to work to one's full potential, which accounted for something like 190 to 230 billion. And so when we look at these metrics, the cost of pain is more than the costs of heart disease and cancer. We have every reason to believe that those numbers have gotten worse in the years since. The pain drug market is also quite large. We've alluded to this before, but $31 billion in 2019, and is growing at a CAGR of 3.4% to 39 billion in 2027. And all of this is sort of, it is the tip of the spear. It's the leading edge, is sort of the detectable part of increasing cases of chronic diseases, growing prevalence of disorders like obesity and diabetes, rising number of cancer cases, high prevalence of musculoskeletal disorders such as arthritis, osteoarthritis, orthopedic degenerative disorders, rheumatoid arthritis. And all of these things lead to increasing cases of chronic pain and worsening ability for folks to carry out the activities of their daily lives. And as I said before, these are just increasing over time. So we see enormous opportunity here to bring forward treatments that have ameliorating effects on chronic pain, because ultimately the costs of untreated pain or undertreated pain or unable to be treated pain are so enormous. As far as timelines, we previously announced that we intended to pursue to file that pre-IND for the first indication in the second half of this year. That will allow us to launch a phase 2 proof of concept study in early 2022. And we anticipate a readout from that study in early 2023. Given that this is such a new franchise for us, and we're currently in the process of figuring out exactly what these trials will look like, a final R&D budget isn't yet in place for the franchise, but obviously as we nail down the details, we'll get to that level of budgeting.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think it's really important to note that this is a big new path for MindMed, and pain is, like many of these illnesses that we're working on are so interconnected. There's so much comorbidity we see where people who have ADHD also have high anxiety and various other connection points. But I think probably the strongest connection point, between, for example, Project Layla, 18MC, and this new pain franchise, is that we can deal with as we progress Layla and other programs, our objective is to deal with opioid withdrawal and opioid addiction over time, subject to the clinical trials working out. But that doesn't really solve that's just like a Band-Aid to the problem. I think if we take a step back and we look at the overall opioid crisis and other addiction crises, there's an underlying problem here specifically with the opioid crisis around how did you get to the pain in the first place, and I think psychedelics and Dan's take on it is that this could be a fundamentally new way to approach pain, and that could be a really game-changing opportunity for the overall market. What I will also say is that as we spin up these new programs, we're going to eventually want to look for partnerships for them, and so that will be paramount to our strategy. But I think our objective as a company is always to bring these through phase 2 proof of concepts or later stage phase 2s, and then as we head into phase 3s, determine are there great partners that would like to collaborate with us. There's a lot of pharmaceutical companies out there that have some massive liabilities in the pain and addiction space because of the opioid crisis. I think eventually these type of companies are going to need to prove to society that they're doing something to help solve these problems. And I think we are going to be very well placed as a company in the future around this. Just coming back to some additional questions here. I think this is a good one for Rob from Jeremy Nathan. Does this sector need to be competitive by default, or is corporate collaboration more important as the scientific development ramps up on so many different fronts? Is there a way to pursue a rising tide raises all ships mentality without hurting the MNMD bottom line? Rob, can you take this one?
Yeah, thanks, JR, and thanks, Jeremy, for the question. I think the answer to some extent is both. Certainly, as valuable, impactful late-stage development data come out from a number of the ongoing programs, this will drive further. We anticipate this would drive further interest in this space, both from practitioners, patients, health authorities, investors. So to that extent, certainly there is a rising tide raises all ships sort of approach. In terms of competitiveness, I think you also see there have been a number of entrants in this space, a whole wide range of entrants in the space with various motives, various approaches to developing these molecules. What I can say for our strategy is that we're always open and exploring opportunities to collaborate with other organizations that are aligned in our core mission and our core values, specifically to bring these therapies to the broadest population in an accessible manner. As we explore those opportunities, certainly anything that comes to fruition will be announced, and we're excited for all of our colleagues, and take this opportunity to congratulate MAPS on their successful phase 3 trial in PTSD with MDMA. I think the last thing I'll say in this regard too is that certainly the rising tide also extends far out into the future in the context of subsequent applications following initial approval. So as we see market entrants get FDA approval for any of the psychedelic molecules, that certainly through the available regulatory pathways opens up opportunities for follow-on abbreviated marketing applications in the US after the NCE exclusivity period ends. So we see an opportunity there where the first mover certainly will have that initial approval, and then 5 years of exclusivity, and then thereafter there will be an opportunity for other entrants in the space, so that there can be broad adoption and an ample supply in the long term for this whole class of molecules.
I think also just picking up on that, there's another question here from Chris Horchak. Where does PTSD fit into your research studies? Do you have any clinical trial results on this area? Any future plans for PTSD? I think I'll take this one. Look, I think MAPS has done an amazing job, for the overall space, but and Rick Doblin's, really helped bring this entire industry to fruition and forward. I don't think we'll be doing anything in the PTSD space, certainly not in the short to medium term. I think we're quite busy with some of our other franchises at the moment, but we're definitely rooting for MAPS and Rick to deliver on their mission as well. But and as always, we remain open to all types of collaborations in the future. So we'll see how that. But yes, PTSD not in our pipeline. There's some questions here from Tom Malinowski about, he's citing various trial numbers on clinicaltrials.gov, and I think overall the answer to these is that most of the things that UHB D-Lab is working on, we have a collaboration agreement which governs those, and we will receive data rights and the ability to file IP against those. That was previously announced, I think, about a year ago when we signed that collaboration agreement. So those trials that you're seeing on clinicaltrials.gov, yes, they are part of the MindMed family in a collaboration. Let's see, what else do we have here? We've covered, more or less, a lot of these are repetitive questions, and I think that kind of brings us to time. So unless barring, okay. There's one question here about what do we? This is from Andy Teo. With all the trials in progress, although it might still be some time from creating any revenue, but when do MindMed target to create some revenue, and when does MindMed target to have profits? Look, we're not gonna comment necessarily on the timing of this. The objective and our purpose as a company is drug development and technology development. The clinical trials will take time, but I think biotech in general, if you look at it as an industry, this is what we do. And we generate value by having favorable clinical outcomes from FDA clinical trials. So I think that's sort of a metric to measure us by. As we look more to the technology side, yeah, we're definitely going to be looking at revenue generating opportunities. I think we're also going to be open up to additional M&A based on the success of what we're seeing with HealthMode, and both integrating folks to build out the team, but also underlying technologies that in the future could contribute to how we scale and launch psychedelic medicines. And I think those are all things that are very relevant. But in terms of near term, don't have any projections on that. But when we do, we'll definitely announce it. I think that really brings us to a conclusion here. I think the one thing I would like for everyone to take away from this is really important work, and we're really happy to have your support. The opioid crisis is not getting smaller; it's getting bigger. Mental health is now front and center as we come out of COVID-19, and I think is, there's going to be some very lasting impact on our mental health in the future. And I think MindMed and just the overall psychedelics industry is very well set up to deal with some of these issues. And ultimately, the objective is to get drugs to market. And so as we focus on our classic psychedelics, that will be the objective. But we'll then try to backfill that with some from next generation psychedelics in the future, or novels as we refer to them. But thank you all for your time. And if there are other questions, feel free to email them to investors@mindmed.co, and we'll do our best to get back to you if we missed any of your questions today. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful week.